Welcome, everyone, and happy Thursday. It is noon Eastern time here on the East Coast in the booming metropolis just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, known as Ambler, PA. Happy Thursday. This is Talent Experience Live, the show that covers everything that you need to know in talent acquisition, talent management, recruiting, artificial intelligence, human resources as a whole, and so much more. Of course, this program is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right work. That's why we host this program every single Thursday, why we have a plethora of other fantastic content like Cliff Yurkowicz's monthly podcast, Unusual Attitudes, like all of our fantastic webinars that we have up and coming, like why we are attending every single HR tech event under the sun this fall, and also why we have AI Day next week. If you haven't signed up yet, you won't want to miss it. I promise. It is all things that you need to know about our artificial intelligence, from how it works to where it's going to what we are excited about in the very near future. So please register for that event. You can find it at phenom.com. But before we get into that, of course, I mentioned all the things that Phenom is doing, but how does that truly help 1 billion people find the right work? Well, the way that we do it is through our artificially intelligent powered is through our AI-powered intelligent talent experience platform, which helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current roles and beyond, recruiters achieve a next level productivity and efficiency, and managers get to build a better team through data automation and analytics. If any of that interests you at all, it can also be found at phenom.com. Don't forget to request a demo and tell them that Devin sent you. I get to use all of those in my annual reviews, and they help. But anywho, now that the bills are paid, we've talked about all the content, we've talked about the platform itself. It is time to dive in to our third part of the TXL featuring Deloitte series. Of course, the first two featured Bhavna Bist and Brandon Kennedy. If you missed those, they are available right now on Apple Music, Spotify, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube and Facebook. You definitely want to check those out. John Deal and Bhavna sat down, had a conversation around AI. I sat down with Brandon. We chatted about the state of candidate experience and candidate experience as a whole. And then part 3 is today, where I sit down with Sue Cantrell and we chat about redefining work with AI. Specifically, we dive into Deloitte's 2025 Human Capital Trends Report. Sue was a wealth of information. I enjoyed our conversation thoroughly. I could talk about it all day, but I already did. So without any further hesitation, here is myself and Sue Cantrell sitting down for a brief conversation around the Deloitte 2025 Human Capital Trends Report. Sue, welcome to the program. Awesome to have you. How are things?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Super excited about today's topic. Obviously, Deloitte released its annual 2025 Global Human Capital Trends, excuse me. I want to ask you, how did the insights from, engagements and insights from last year differ, when we're comparing these year over year? What were some of the new insights that we found?
Oh, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
We actually have the pleasure of doing the longest running longitudinal study of human capital ever done. So it's a great question. I think one of the things that's different from last year's, we had talked about the previous year around organizations facing this boundaryless world of work, right? Where work is no longer defined by jobs, the workplace is no longer a specific place, and many workers no longer are considered traditional employees, right? And I think this year we found in our report that this is creating tensions, and that boundaryless world of work is just getting even more so, especially due to AI. And so leaders are just feeling the pressure to be able to navigate in this world that's so much harder to navigate because our traditional boundaries or definitions of what we've depended on for the world of work are just kind of crumbling and falling away. So we definitely felt that in terms of leaders and being able to kind of navigate in this new world.
No, it's funny to kind of think about maybe work. I want to say early 2000s, late 1990s, where it was simply limited to like 9 to 5, right? And
Yep.
then
Yep.
the kind of oncoming of the invention or regular use, I'll call it, of email and it being available on your mobile phones blurred those lines a little bit. Fast forward to 2020, where everyone was kind of working from home and people had different working hours. We had this really global workforce that came together, so much remote work, and those lines blurred even more. And now you look at it in 2025 with the onset of AI agents and artificial intelligence kind of generally accepted. The picture is no longer clear. It is it is an abstract work of
Yep.
art where those lines
Yep.
are completely blurred. So
Yep.
awesome to see those changes.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned even the lines blurred between AI and workers. We call it convergence in this year's trends, where it used to be that it was like AI was either automation or augmentation, and then it was human and machine collaboration. Well, we're seeing this era where those lines about what AI does versus what worker does are increasingly blurred. So it's a great example. And some of the other like boundaries we're seeing shattering are like what is the notion of the job? Well, traditionally, our work was defined by job, right? It was a set of repeatable functional tasks. But today, our research shows that most workers are actually doing work outside of the boundary of their job description, or the notion of what is a worker. It used to be just an employee, right? It was a singular full-time staff, as you alluded to. Now it's a full ecosystem of workers, contractors, gig workers, AI agents that create value or perform work for an organization. So many of those boundaries are shattering. Or I'll just take another example of employee engagement, right? It used to be that that was the fundamental measure of relationship between organizations and workers. But oftentimes now we're wondering if a better measure might be trust, right? After all, measuring how much discretionary effort workers are willing to expend for their organization's behalf only benefits a company, but whether or not it helps workers is far less clear. So, is trust a better measure? So, we talk about it in terms of proxies. Do we need to get beyond kind of the proxies like employee engagement and try to measure actually what's going on, measure work instead of just the job, as an
Yeah.
example?
No, it's fascinating times. And obviously the report jumps into multiple different trends. And I would love to go through all of them today, Sue, but we simply don't have the time. So
Yeah.
we'll kind of dive into four. And I think we
Mhm.
kind of alluded to something there. Let's start with some of the macro trends that maybe we won't get too nitty gritty with, and then we'll dive into some four key trends. What would you say are those overarching macro trends that the report holds?
AI penetrates everything. We have a specific AI trend around that we thought was kind of an underlooked at area, which is how AI is impacting the employee value proposition and the very experience of people at work. But AI penetrates every single one of our trends. It's a big one. This notion of what do you measure is a big one. So, for example, we used to measure productivity. It's a big one, especially in the era of AI. But do we need to measure outcomes versus outputs? Another big kind of macro theme penetrating all of our trends is this notion of what we call at Deloitte human performance. So it used to be that most organizations, and still today, obviously we focus on business outcomes, absolutely critical. Things like innovation and revenue growth, quality, things of that sort. But what we see is that organizations sometimes think of it as an either or equation when it comes to human outcomes. Things like greater employability for workers, basically creating value for workers as human beings. So, greater well being, greater employability, skill development, and growth. And what we found in our research is that it's not an either and, it's a multiplier effect. So, if you create more human outcomes, then you're going to have greater business outcomes. They mutually reinforce one another. So, that notion of human performance threads throughout all of our trends as well.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting time, and also exciting to hear that the kind of employee well-being is being bubbled up to those business outcome conversations, right? When you first
Mm-hmm.
started talking about it, that sounded like a conversation in a boardroom, right? Of, what's
Mm-hmm.
our output? What is our bottom line? And now it's how are we improving the individuals that we employ? How are we getting the most out of them? Because when we do that and they are happy and hardworking individuals, the business benefits as a whole. You mentioned that AI drives through all of it. We're going to talk a little bit about AI agents specifically in recruiting, right? It is a hot
Mm-hmm.
topic in our industry. I want to ask
Yep.
you, what type of conversations are you having with clients when it comes to agents? Are they understanding it? I know when the topic first started, it's all confusion. Are we getting past that point where people are beginning to hypothesize about the kind of output or the approach to rolling these out? Or is it still in that kind of infancy stage where people don't know how they're going to apply these yet?
We're in a mixed world. I think some organizations are really actively working on it and experimenting. Some are still trying to get their arms wrapped around it. I mean, when it comes to AI agents, I almost think of them as capabilities. I think that's a useful way to think about it. Capabilities embedded in tech that can be done. I think organizations are spending a lot of time thinking about things like the use cases of where to apply it, like in talent acquisition, as an example, which is very, very valuable. They're thinking about change management, right? They're thinking about reskilling and upskilling as a result. They're thinking about how roles are changing. But one of the things that we are seeing that they're not looking at as much, and we suggest they do, is how, when workers are increasingly using AI, like AI agents, there's all kinds of forms of AI, how that's actually changing the experience of people at work, like recruiters, as an example, in talent acquisition. Sometimes we find that it's creating silent impacts. So, as an example, from our research, we oftentimes think that AI makes our work easier. Well, our research shows that not necessarily. So oftentimes it makes it harder because AI often does the easier rote work, leading behind the hardest tasks for workers. Or we're finding that AI sometimes reduces person to person interactions, and that can contribute to loneliness and isolation. Or we're finding sometimes that it can reduce human agency. It can tell a person what to do rather than letting them decide. So those are some of the unintended silent impacts. It's all based on how you use AI, of course, but we're really encouraging organizations to also look at how it's being used, design those interactions with AI very intentionally to improve those human and business outcomes, and especially those human outcomes because it's being underlooked at oftentimes by organizations.
Approaching this with intention is certainly a key point there that you called out. I work in, obviously the creative world. And if I had $1 for every time that someone said, well, can't you just use AI for that video? I would be a rich
Right.
person. So I wouldn't be
Yeah.
talking to you right now. But you're absolutely right. It can remove some of those easier tasks, but there are, concerns and consequences to that. Loneliness is one that I don't think is being talked about enough, where
Yep.
you can have a conversation, with an AI agent or, one of these GPTs. And that's not going to give you the same, satisfaction or fulfillment of talking with a human. So fascinating to talk about. I would love to talk about it more, but we have so much more to get to.
Right.
We're talking about, some of these rollouts with intention. What are some of the places that your clients or the folks that you are speaking with are rolling out AI and agents as we see it right now? Everyone talks about kind of the mundane tasks. What are those specifically that people are trying to tackle with them?
Oh my gosh. I mean, all over the place. I mean, I would suggest that you look for areas where you get both business and human outcomes, that human performance thing. But one of those areas, for example, I'll just give you an example, is we're seeing a lot of organizations implement AI coaches. A fun example from our research is an organization had an employee that had very expert knowledge, and only he had it. He was retiring. So instead of having him kind of train all the workers left behind after he retired on his expert knowledge, with his permission, they used AI to monitor all of his phone calls, all of his work on his computer, all of that passive data. They baked it into an AI agent. They called it Digital Doug. His name was Doug. And then they used it to help their workers as a coach, as a learning vehicle, right? And so AI coaching, we're seeing a lot of it improves not only workforce performance and business outcomes, but it improves learning and development and skills for workers, that human performance equation.
Talk about leaving behind a legacy there. And
Isn't that
most times when
crazy?
someone leaves, it's just a Google Doc, right? that
I
has
know,
all of
right?
their notes, and that person still gets text messages. But actually, kind of, I don't want to say embedding yourself in artificial intelligence, but allowing all of your knowledge and asking some of those
Yep.
maybe minimal questions or questions that come up sparingly to embed that. That's a fantastic use.
Yeah, and then it raises so many interesting questions, right? Like, should he be rewarded for his
Yeah.
expertise embedded at scale and shared, even though he's no longer an employee? So we're finding all kinds of interesting questions raised as that we're seeing that convergence between AI and humans, and Digital Dog is a perfect example of that convergence.
That is a fascinating question. I'm not going to answer if he should get paid. I have my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. Now, obviously, I find this ironic that we are, in the human resources industry, and it seems that they are one of the most forward-thinking, fast-moving people with artificial intelligence. And I think everyone is
Hmm.
under the assumption that we need to keep humans in the loop, right? You
Yep.
mentioned kind of removing humans or individuals getting recommendations from artificial intelligence and going moving forward with that. What
Mhm.
sort of kind of risk adjustment, or how are people trying to avoid those risks? Because everyone is saying you're doing these remedial tasks, we need to remove them, we need more artificial
Hmm.
intelligence to speed up the process, but how are
Hmm.
they keeping humans involved? I think is the way I want to answer that question.
Yeah, well, obviously, we all know it's important to keep humans involved. I mean, I think the world is moving to an era where almost everybody is going to be managing AI agents, and they need oversight. They're going to take on the role of a manager of AI agents. They need to observe their work, course correct if needed. We're just embarking on a new series of research, actually, that's looking at what the academics call decision rights of AI agents. So, in plain language, who gets to decide? Is it the AI agent, and under what conditions, versus when does the human decide? Does an AI agent, for example, take a first pass at a task, do something as a first draft, and then the human validates it and says that's okay. As AI agents take on more work, some really interesting academics have been doing some research about the potential for cognitive decline, meaning as we rely more and more on AI, is our critical thinking, our creativity, all of those really important skills in decline. And it is a big risk. You mentioned risk. And we need to make sure that we guard against that as we're becoming more and more reliant on AI. AI, not just to perform those kind of transactional tasks, but let's make sure that we are continuing to invest in our critical thinking. I think divergent thinking is going to be more important than ever before, and that we not only keep humans in the loop and oversee AI, but we continue to develop those very human skills that's going to keep us differentiated as human beings, but also for our organizations. That's ultimately at the heart of competitive advantage for companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thought of us removing some of these smaller tasks and it having an adverse effect on intelligence and the human connection, and the way that
Yeah.
we interact with one another. It's funny, when I first started using GPTs and AI and things like that, I'd still say please and thank you, right? Because I'm fearful of when the AI will take over the world. I want them to lay mercy on me. I kid, obviously. I know that won't happen, but um, that has since gone to the wayside, right? And I don't think it's because I've become less polite by any means, but
Mhm.
it's just how we
Mhm.
interact. If you extrapolate that over time, I
Yep.
think that there are some aspects of it that certainly will, rub off on individuals, especially if you're removing the recruiter from certain instances
Right.
of the application or interview
Yep.
process.
Yep.
What sort of impact does that have on the candidate where they don't say please and thank you, right? Does that all of a sudden rank them in a different way? So these are all fascinating conversations, but I want to ask you from a recruiter's role as we continue to evolve AI, and I think the digital Doug example is very interesting here. How do you think that will impact recruiters? Do you foresee a future maybe where recruiters have their own digital versions of themselves for, specific roles and things like that. This is science fiction, of
I
course, as it stands
know.
right now, but also you're sharing an example where maybe it isn't, right?
I know, funny thing, 3 or 4 years ago, before generative AI, I wrote a piece called Digital Doppelgangers, where I kind of
Okay.
predicted this. And of course, now we're actually starting to see this, literally AI versions of yourself. So we all know that candidates don't, they value the human touch. They don't necessarily always like everything being automated without a human voice behind it. But you raise an interesting question. What if it was a unique digital doppelganger of a particular recruiter? So it's not just some mass large language model. It's actually a digital version of the actual recruiter. Could that improve their experience? And then when does the recruiter come in terms of, not handling the transactional stuff? And that's what the digital doppelganger of a recruiter could do, but building those relationships and answering the more complex questions. So you raised some really interesting questions. It's a brave new world, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I think as we, kind of talking about those macro insights that you mentioned at the top, as we move towards this almost borderless working world,
Mm-hmm.
right, where
Mm-hmm.
we're not limited to job titles, we're not limited to job
Yep.
descriptions, and
Yep.
employees are offering so much more. I see it, and I had this conversation with Brandon last week, where there could be an instance where the application is a conversation with a digital recruiter, right, where you're able to dive into some of those experiences that you've particularly had. You may not be a like for like match for a particular role, and you don't want to be kind of nicked in your fit score or however they are ranked. So you have this
Mhm.
conversation where you're able to extrapolate key points or
Yep.
key situations and really make yourself more valuable to an organization. That's where I see it going personally, where I know we've joked about the resume kind of disappearing
Yes.
or cover letters disappearing. They haven't, to I think anyone's prediction yet. I haven't seen an application
And
where
and
that's
we've
still
been
not a
reading about
requirement.
that for decades, right? Yes.
So it paints a fascinating picture where I could see an organization allowing itself to really open the doors to thousands and thousands more candidates who may not have, a resume coach or something like that, but may
Yeah.
provide intrinsic value based on life experiences, based on everything we want when we talk about from a human perspective. Um,
100%. Their skills, all of those hidden capabilities that just don't show up on a resume. Yep.
Yeah, but we'll continue on. We'll dive into trend two. I think this is a nice little segue. Within the report, I know it talks about AI enabling organizations to kind of redesign work, and there's a trend called "when work gets in the way of work." What exactly does that mean? I know what it means to me. It's when I'm in
Yeah.
the midst of doing something very productive, and then I get a Slack message or an email, or perhaps I can't find an email. What does it mean when work gets in the way of work?
That's right. Well, all that busy work, all that non-essential work can get in the way of the real work, the value-added work, the essential work, right? So here's a fun anecdote. Um, you ask anyone, how are you at work? Well, one study found that 8 in 10 respondents, 80%, answered only one word. Can you guess what it was?
Good,
Busy.
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 All
We're
right, there
all
you go.
busy. We're all busy. So another study found that 68% of people say they lack uninterrupted time for important tasks during the workday. So it's all of that little non-essential tasks that get in the way of our core work. So think about it. John Maynard Keynes predicted a 15-hour work week a long time ago that we'd have it by now. But we're busier than ever, right? So, our research found that 41% of daily work is spent on non-essential tasks. So, what do you do about it? Well, you can redesign work, but here's the catch. We believe that we need to redesign work to create what's called slack. What is slack? It's unscheduled, unassigned time for workers to use as they see fit. And why do we need it? It's because we need that extra time to learn, to focus deeply on a problem, even take a walk outside for 5 minutes where some of our good ideas will come. We need to get more slack into the system, but organizations don't often value it. They think slack equates to slacker, right? But it's giving us fallow time to be creative, to think deeply, right? And oftentimes when organizations redesign work, especially with AI, they just take they fill it up with more work, right? So one organization, they redesigned work, eliminated some of the low-hanging fruit with AI. And so they designed it then where 80% of a team's capacity was devoted to work, the remaining 20%, nothing. It was a buffer meant to give workers the ability to accommodate unexpected issues. Really important for organizations that need to be agile and innovative today. So how AI can help with it. Obviously, we can use it to eliminate some of that non-essential value robbing activities. And then we can use it to help figure out what it is we're actually doing so we can redesign work. But the major focus here is let's not redesign it so that we're just piling more work on. Let's create some slack in the system.
Yeah, and I think that ties into your point earlier, where you talk about some of the creativity, that downtime that individuals can get, where they can hone in on what makes people people. I think that this sentiment is worthwhile and certainly needed in a lot of organizations. I have a feeling that a lot of the audience, kind of at home or tuning in right now, would say, does that onus typically fall on the organization to kind of set those parameters for quote unquote slack, or is it on the employee? Because we've all seen it, right? You hop
Yeah,
on somebody's calendar, you're looking to book time,
yeah,
it
yeah,
says busy or downtime.
yeah.
How does that relationship play into this?
It's both. We talk
Okay.
about co-creating work redesign, making room for slack. You can't,
Yeah.
it's both clearly. And you need to do it with workers, and workers need to guard some of their time. We're all guilty of it. I mean, I have seen organizations run experiments of meeting free Fridays, right? Or, a long time ago, decades ago, organizations ran the 80-20 rule, 80% of work for your core job, 20% on like special projects devoted to like deep innovative work that could be a wild card bonus benefit of innovative new things for the company. So there are various ways the organizations can help structure it. Certainly organizations are important to help workers identify it, but workers are critical to the equation too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we think about this kind of application, and obviously we're talking about technology, how are organizations seeing value in technology? Oftentimes, as I mentioned, kind of at the beginning of the conversation, when you think of boardroom conversations, investor conversations, everyone is very focused on the bottom line, and I think that is the same when it comes to technology. They want to
Yep.
see what the ROI will be, how to estimate that return on investment. But what we're talking about here is far more abstract, right? It is getting the most out of employees, giving them their time back, giving them slack and opportunity to critical think and be creative. How do you put dollars and cents on something that is tough to do? It's tough to create that equation. How are organizations looking at it from that perspective?
You're spot on. I mean, the big question organizations are looking at is how do we get value out of tech? And the very first question have to ask is what is the value? Because it's not a simple equation anymore. As you said, it's not a simple kind of ROI, efficiency, return on investment equation. So think about what's different today. Instead of a few core technologies to choose from, we're faced with hundreds. We have dozens of use cases, not just a few use cases. Tech is now owned across multiple functions and stakeholders, right? Lots of bright, shiny objects. And that just complicates that straightforward ROI equation. So what do you do? So to answer your question, we need to measure human outcomes and business outcomes, a whole variety of outcomes beyond dollars and cents. And we need to take a cue from R&D of a portfolio investments, and with the expectation that with some investments in tech, they might not pan out, but that they'll pay for the other ones that do pan out. And then lastly, to co-create value cases for technologies with a broad set of stakeholders across the organization. So it is definitely kind of a new ROI equation that leaders are looking at for tech.
Yeah, I think it's when you think of technology, I equate it to a muscle group, right? You have so many of these different factors that are coming into it, and it's just like, going for a walk, as you mentioned, and expecting to be a marathon runner at the end of it. It will take time. You'll probably be a little bit sore throughout the process. You will probably
Mm-hmm,
have
mm-hmm.
growing pains and may sleep better at night. Those are the instant ROIs, but some of those things are going to take a long while to get to that gold standard that everyone wants and that everyone is kind of sold in those demos and pretty videos
Yes.
that are put up online. I want to switch gears slightly for a second. Within the report, you call out stagility, which I love because as we explore these conversations, as we talk about the futuristic interview process where we will have recruiter agents and all sorts of things like that, it's going to take time. There needs to be some level of stability within it and agility. You will do a far better job than I will explaining it. So talk to me a little bit about this concept of stagility.
Yeah. So why did we coin the word stagility? Obviously, it's made up of the word of agility and stability. So here's the deal. Leaders, organizations, they need more agile work. 85% of leaders in our survey say they want more agile work. Increasing uncertainty, change, the response is needing more agility. But here's the catch. Workers, 75% of them want stability. They need that sense of grounding. They feel like the ground is eroding underneath their feet. They need that feeling of stability to thrive. But those old ways that we used to give them stability, lifelong employment, the notion of like your only work is within your job, right? Uh, Predictable linear career pathways, all of those are eroding. So we need to replace them with almost new anchors for them. So things like being able to provide solid ground on instead of thinking about a job, for example, why don't we think of skills, of outcomes, right? In terms of organizing work in that respect, talent marketplaces can play a role in that. When it comes to who people learn from, they would go and ask a question to their boss or their teammate.
Mm-hmm.
But bosses today oftentimes don't even know the work that their employee is doing well anymore. We've got this rise of cross-functional teams. So a new anchor, for example, would be turning to AI, that collective intelligence powered by AI, where we can ask AI a question and get the collective expertise of a wide variety of people we know. So the main thing with stagility is to really think through what can we do to help give workers that sense of comfort and stability that they're craving while still having that agility that leaders need to adapt and compete in this marketplace.
Yeah, and you have to have that, right? From the perspective of no one likes change. I always like to make the jokes that if anyone says that they like change, ask them to move. And no one's going to like it, right? So creating that commonality, all of that is going to tie into your stagility coined phrase there.
Mhm.
Next up on the docket, of course, has to be skill. Do you see skills-based marketplaces playing a role more than other trends when it comes to the experience gap? How much are skills marketplace going to change with the amount that skills are changing and augmentation of artificial intelligence?
Well, a couple things. Partially, well, to answer your question, yes, I think skills-based talent marketplaces are going to be huge in helping close this experience gap. What do we mean when we say experience gap? What we mean is that organizations today are struggling to get the experience they need. So they're upping experience requirements. So what we're finding is that 61% of employers have increased the experience requirements, especially of entry level talent in the past 3 years. And yet at the same time, workers, and in particular entry level workers and career changers, they struggle to find foothold jobs where they can acquire experience. So it's an oxymoron, right? So that's what we mean by the experience gap. I do think skills rather than experience will play a huge role in helping solve this problem. And what we mean is the traditional definition of experience, people think of years of work directly related to the job's relevant tasks. It's a proxy and it's a poor one. So, what do we really want when we say experience? What we really need is an expanded definition, which is really the ability for workers to apply skills knowledge, and human capabilities, things like emotional intelligence, problem solving, creativity, under real world conditions in context to create outcomes. That's really what we want. So, to answer your question, I think skills based marketplaces can really help play an important role in this. But we need to expand our definition of skills beyond hard skills to include things like human capabilities, which are increasingly important. Things like curiosity, problem solving, critical thinking, those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it begs the question with all of these changes, I think the one individual within the entire kind of talent cycle and even employee cycle is the manager, right? All of this
Mm.
information is so easily accessible, kind of just out on the World Wide Web, right? If you don't know how to create a certain document, you can ask, AI, and it will provide you an answer.
Right.
If
Right.
you are looking for new skills that no one knows about, you can ask that. How is the manager being impacted throughout all of these changes that are happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, we feel like it's really important that managers play a critical role. And a lot of organizations, if you read the news, are sometimes they're eliminating the role of the middle manager to be flatter, to eliminate hierarchy, to reduce cost, or they're significantly reducing them. We think there's a third path. Beyond just reducing the role of the middle manager or keeping it status quo, which is to reinvent it. And I think that there are three key ways that it needs to be reinvented to deal with this kind of new world of work we've been painting here. The first way is to continue to focus the role of the manager on developing, coaching, motivating, and nurturing their people. We know that improves performance, and AI can help. So, for example, when organizations managers use AI to help guide them in providing developmental opportunities and feedback to their workers. The second role of the middle manager is to do something that's a little bit beyond what the traditional manager scope has been, which is to redesign work, reallocate resources, and optimize human and machine interactions in an age of AI. As AI continues to penetrate work and the workforce, managers need to rethink how work is done. They need to think who does it? The humans, the machines, a combination of both. They need to help workers better collaborate with smart machines, going back to what I said earlier about like making sure they're not feeling lonely if they're working with AI or they're not suffering cognitive debt. They're continuing to improve their critical thinking skills. The third area for the role of the managers is to enable agility, strategic problem solving, organizational reinvention, right? And AI can help with this. So, for example, we found that AI can help managers make better strategic decisions. They can suggest key performance indicators to inform strategy. AI can even help observe workers' decision-making effectiveness and make recommendations on who should make decisions in a more empowered way. So just having the role of the manager can actually help enable a more decentralized, responsive organization. And all of these three capabilities of the role of manager is based on the foundational skill of judgment or the ability to make difficult decisions with insufficient information.
Yeah, no, it's vital. I think from my perspective, I won't speak for Phenom or anyone else. I think the role of that middle manager is so vital because when you look at an org structure, right? If you remove that, who is there to be the champion for kind
Yep.
of your employees, right? Who is there to, as you put, coach them through things, talk about some of these critical skills. A lot of what I think separates an employee from a middle manager to even, senior leadership is going to be how they conduct themselves in meetings, right? What ways to approach different tactics. And they know that from a personal perspective, right? They are very familiar with the VP because they have a meeting with them on a regular basis. You may
Hmm.
not be.
Hmm.
And also caring for the well-being of individuals. It is
Yes.
intimidating to stand up, for yourself when you need some of that slack time, when you
Yeah.
need a break or a Friday off or wherever it may be, as opposed to having someone where you have a regular conversation. And sometimes maybe even you don't talk about work. I know I've done previous TXLs on that before, where the role of a good employee manager is, asking how someone feels and not just blowing over it as the first statement, in a question, is really diving into that, because that's why we're all here. We spend more
Yeah.
time with
Yeah.
our coworkers than we do our family. It's important to have
Yeah.
a vital relationship with them.
It's so critical. Yet we did a study, and most managers don't feel like they have enough time to do that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So we asked how they spend their time. 40% of their time is eaten up with firefighting, today's problems, or on admin work, and that is where AI can help. And also, over a third of managers don't even feel like they're supported in that people manager part of their role by the organization. So there's a lot we can do to help managers, and not only for their benefit, because they're very burned out as a population themselves, but for the benefit of our workers and organizations as a whole.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. And I think it is time that they get a little bit of relief, right? As you mentioned, 40% is saying that they don't have it. It's crazy, right? Like, but I've seen my managers Google Calendar. It is booked solid to even
Yeah,
find
they're kind
15
of a
minutes. So
catch-all right now for
yeah.
everything, right?
Mhm.
Their role is so amorphous.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it brings me to kind of my next question, which ties into managers a little bit, is what new leadership skills do you think are going to be most critical? I think we touched on it there with some of the personal stuff, but what bold move can leaders make to kind of future proof, maybe in this case their actual job, but also their workforce? How can they leverage everything that we've talked to from a leadership perspective and move forward and find success?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to one of our key principles I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, which is that I think the single biggest thing they can do is to balance that business and human outcomes and make sure that they're synergistic rather than working at odds against each other. Because if they improve human outcomes, they are future proofing their workforce, right? And they're improving their business outcomes. So, just to make it tangible, if we invest in learning and development, we give our workers AI coaches, we measure their well being, all of that is going to have an impact on their performance, which is going to have an impact on business outcomes. So, really managing that aside, both sides of the equation of human performance, which is business and human outcomes.
Yeah.
That is one of the critical tensions that leaders have to balance today. But I'd say there are a lot of other really tricky tensions for them to balance. And the trick is it's not an either or mindset. It's a both and proposition. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Automation versus augmentation. I touched on this earlier. It's not it's not an or, it's an and. We need to think about AI not just as an automation engine, especially with AI agents coming on the forefront. I read a study just recently that said over half of leaders who used AI to kind of replace people regretted their decision. Instead, we need to think about using AI as augmentation, as collaboration, and as what we talk about at Deloitte as convergence to reinvent kind of work and what a worker is doing and what they stand for and their very identity. Another tension we mentioned earlier is stability versus agility. We need to manage that tension. Another really key one is outputs versus outcomes. We talked about this and getting value out of tech. So instead of managing outputs, time worked, products created, meetings attended, can we think about measuring outcomes? What are we really trying to drive? Improved customer satisfaction, innovation, quality, or some of those human outcomes. So I think leaders, most important, need that skill of identifying those tensions and balancing them as a way to move forward in this new world.
Yeah, absolutely. One kind of underlying key point that I got from that was, yes, people will remember the work you did, the projects you completed, and everything that you accomplished while you were in a role. But more importantly, they'll remember how you made them feel, right? And I think that
Hmm.
is the key point that you're talking about from a leadership
Hmm.
perspective. It
Hmm.
is balancing those two of, I
Yes.
care for my employees. If
Yes.
I'm trying to replace employees with artificial intelligence, would it be more beneficial to knowledge share on the way that I'm leveraging AI to improve them, to upskill them, to get them to that next level, as opposed to looking at it from an ROI or a dollars and cents perspective, because you don't want to
Yeah.
have that regret.
100%. In a fun story, I interviewed a leader, and he had told me that he realized that some of his workers were using AI to perform a lot of their work, and they were hiding it. They weren't using company tools. They were feeling like it needed to be kind of done under the table. And instead, once he found out, he turned it out and celebrated it. He said, "Look, workers are using AI to reinvent their work. Let's
Mhm.
celebrate this. Let's share it. Let's not put it under the table. I'd rather know about it and make sure that it's shared and celebrated and recognized with empathy, and give it as a model for others to do the same."
Yeah, and that's going to remove some of that fear, right? Not just from an
Yeah,
employee perspective where they're fearful that AI could replace their job, but also fearful that they can improve, right? And all of that. That's exciting. I had a conversation very similar where there was an organization that blocked all of the GPTs and all of the AI
yeah,
sites that were
yeah.
readily available. And what did we do because humans are resilient? The recruiters started using it on their phones, which is even
Exactly.
worse.
Yes,
Could you
yes,
imagine?
yes, yes, yes. And that's what this leader was saying.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's get
Uh-huh.
it out from under the shadows. Let's
Yeah.
embrace it and make it part
Yeah.
of the employee value proposition, to what I was talking about earlier. That can
Yeah.
be a key part that of something that could attract and retain workers.
Yes. 100%. Sue, this has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank you so much for your time. For people who want to find the 2025 Global Human Trends Capital Report, excuse me, let me get it right. The 2025 Global Human Capital Trends Report, where can they find it and where can they learn more?
Yeah, just Google Deloitte Human Capital Trends 2025. It should pop right up. We have multiple chapters. It's something we do every year. We have, like, I think it was over 13,000 respondents last year. So it is a massive research project, and we'd love for everybody to check it out.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Congratulations on your work. It is fantastic. And hopefully we'll have you on next year again. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time and have a great day.
Fun.
Bye. Thanks so much, Sue. Also, thank you to Brandon and Bhavna and the entire Deloitte team. Thank you, Corey, as well. These past 3 weeks have been fantastic. I've enjoyed the conversations. I want to also shout out John Deal for joining. I think this is a ton of great information here for you. And better yet, it is all free. You can listen to it, you can watch it, you can dive into the reports yourself. However you choose to consume it, you can. But I think that this is a great starting point, and it is always nice to sit down and have a conversation with Deloitte. If any of it interests you at all, you can find the information on Deloitte's websites as well as on Phenom's website for the State of Canada experience. But in the meantime, I hope everyone has a safe, happy, and healthy weekend. As I mentioned at the top of the program, AI Day is next week, so you want to register now. But if you can't make it there, you can always watch it on demand, or maybe we'll see you at one of our HR tech events coming up this fall. I hope everyone has a safe, happy, and healthy weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much.